by mistake. Anna refuses to go back to Arendelle without Elsa. Frustrated, Elsa accidentally lets loose a blast of magic. Then she creates a giant snowman to usher Anna and Kristoff off the mountain.
Daddy,
Yes?
can you make me a giant snowman?
I don't know, but I could try.
Yay! Thank you. I can't wait to see it.
So the first thing I had to do was start with some 2-inch XPS foam. I had made some templates to give me the right proportions of what I was looking for the body parts. So once I was happy with templates and I thought they were correct, I started cutting with my foam cutter. Cutting through 2-inch foam with a handheld foam cutter is pretty fun. This was pretty much just rough cuts to give me the basic shapes of what I was looking for. Now, some of the pieces were just a little too thick for the 2-inch, so I had to go back and cut the depth, especially for the head, because there's a lot of different sizes going on with that. And the bottom body part, I had to cut out also. Good old-fashioned knives work good too. So once I had my rough shapes cut out, I had to start doing my contouring with my sandpaper. And this was a pretty long process to get to the desired shapes that I was looking for. As you can see, nice rounded edges. Once I was happy with that, it was time to start cutting out the feet and the leg pieces. After that, it was time to cut and shape the parts for the arms. Next was the hands. There was a lot of contouring that had to go on for those. Cut and sand, till I found the shape that I was happy with. I love how that hot wire knife just cuts through it like nice butter. And more sanding. And sanding. And more sanding. Almost. There we go. So once I had all my basic parts, it was time to stick them all together. So I used wood skewers to position all the body parts onto the body. Time to figure out the legs. Oh, a little bit more sanding. Once they looked good, then it was time to skewer them and get them in position. had to make sure that they looked right on the body. If they didn't seem to fit right, then there was a little bit more sculpting involved until they seemed to have the right angles. Once I was happy with that, it was time to assemble the arms. I had to make sure that I had the right angles, so when he was standing there, it looked like he was pushing the trees aside. Then they were doweled together. I didn't glue yet until I was happy with all the positioning and the lengths of all the pieces. And looked pretty good. It was time to glue. I used tacky glue. Seemed to be the best. I could have used Elmer's glue because it didn't really matter. And I had to make sure that it was in the positions that it had to be in, because once it was dried, I didn't want to have to take it apart. So now that he was all glued together, it was time to sculpt out the face. So I drew out the eyes and the mouth because they were going to be kind of hollow almost. Then I took my Dremel and I cut out the foam, which worked better than I expected. I wasn't sure how I was going to get those small pieces out like that, and the Dremel seemed to be the best option, and it worked. After I was happy with the somewhat face sculpting, then I had to use clay to get the other elements of the face, the eyebrows, the nose, and the mouth parts. I didn't use any special clay. I actually used Play-Doh that my daughter had laying around. It seemed to work very well. It didn't dry out that much. I also noticed when I put it together that the back looked a little shallow, so once I was happy with all the other parts, I cut out a piece to extrude the back a little bit. Happy with that, I pegged it in place and glued it. Then it was time to Mod Podge. I mixed white paint with the Mod Podge and gave it a good coat of Mod Podge. Also, all the joints that were involved, I used regular joint compound to smooth those out, which worked out fine with minimal cracking. Once the Mod Podge was done, then it was time to give him a coat of plain old white paint. then another coat of white paint. While that was drying, it was time to cut out the finger parts. And then the base. Just a pretty easy design on the base. Did a simple curve. Once I was happy with the curve, it was time to sand it all down. Once I was happy with that, it was time to mix some sculpt mold to make a contoured base. This is the first time I used sculpt mold. I had marked out where marshmallow was going to stand, and I put dowels in there before the sculpt mold would dry. And then it was time to position marshmallow. And I had to kind of guesstimate where the trees were going to go. It looked pretty good. And finished smoothing it out. While that was drying, it was time to construct the trees. I used regular coconut fiber. Cut those into round pieces from big to small. I had some, I believe, number 6 wire laying around. I figured that would be easy to get the bend that I needed in the trees. I did pack the trees kind of tight because of the plaster that I needed to put all along the tree, so I needed something for it to hold it in place. So as you can see, we just went from large to small. I did this for 3 trees, one on the right, one on the left, and one in behind marshmallow. When I was happy with the tree design, I went ahead and spray painted them hunter green. While the trees were dying, I did my coat of Mod Podge and white paint on the base to seal that up. Then I did some flocking on the trees. I used just spray adhesive, and then I used conifer flocking. I don't really think I needed to do this step, but I did it anyway. Once I had my trees done, it was time to put the artificial snow on there. I used regular lightweight hydrocal. was the first time I had ever used hydrocal. Pretty neat stuff, and it gave me the effect that I was looking for the large clumps of snow that were on the trees. I was pretty liberal with the amount that I put on there. Poured it on and gooped it on. Had to work very fast. Stuff dries really quick. I was surprised how quick it actually dries or gets stiffened. Then it was time to paint all of the finger pieces. That was kind of a pain because they were really small. I used a light blue. I actually stuck the pieces on needles so I could hold them while I was painting. When they were finished, I took some clear silicone and I added very little amount of a lighter blue to give it the illusion of being like ice. I didn't know how this was going to work, and it actually worked out pretty good. I didn't want to put too much paint in there because I knew that the silicone wouldn't cure if it had too much paint, but it came out really good. So I actually used this as the glue to hold all the finger parts together. And plus it was tacky enough where I could move the pieces around and position them well before it cured. After I got all the fingers in place, I added a couple of like icicles on his legs. Once that was done, I did a very light dry brush of the light blue on all the pieces. Now I didn't do any video on the spray painting that I did on this because it was the very first time I did it and I was making a mess, and I never did airbrushing before, so I had to do a lot of practicing with it. It took me a very long time even to mix the paints correctly, but I did achieve it. And when I first did the trees, they were very purple, and I was like, oh my God, this looks like infrared. But then I had to go back and dry brush over the spray paint, and which is probably not the right thing to do, but it was the only way I could do it. When I was happy with that, I took my spray glue again, and I sprayed everything down, and I added glitter. It gave it a very nice sheen and sparkle that really pulled all the colors out. Then it was time to work on Olaf. Again, I used regular Play-Doh to sculpt out all of his body parts. And once again, the Play-Doh dried nicely, very minimal cracking. When his body was done, then I had cut up little pieces of wood to make his arms. This was a challenge because the pieces were so small. Then it was time to crazy glue all the little pieces together. This took me forever. He was all assembled and looked pretty good. Then it was time to paint him. I used regular white paint. Gave him a good dose of paint. I used regular brown, just regular brown paint to paint all the wood parts. They all dried pretty quick. Then it was time to just use regular orange paint to do his carrot nose. My hands are not steady. It was quite a challenge not to get it all over the place.
Well, it's finally done. I'll be honest with you, this was not an easy build for me. Everything that I did on this was pretty much a learning curve. I had to experiment with everything, especially the painting of the trees. I'm not an artist, so it took me a very long time. That's why I didn't have much video on it, because I had to do a lot of off-camera experimenting. But I did dry brush for the first time the purples on the trees, and it kind of looked, I had very purple trees, and I said, oh my god, it looks like infrared. So I didn't know what to do, so I did a lot of dry brushing on top of the airbrushing, which is probably not the right way to do it, but that's the only way I could figure out how to get the coloring that I wanted. So I think it came out pretty good, and my little Olaf came out pretty good. It looks pretty nice. Here's the reference photo that I used for this. So, of course, you know that Disney is the master at doing all this kind of stuff. So I don't think it came out too bad from the reference photo. Like I said, the painting for me was the hardest. Custom making the trees for the first time, using plaster for the first time. So it was pretty cool. It was a pretty fun build for me, learning all the different stuff. So I think I'm going to do more dioramas in the future, and I have a whole box of fake dinosaurs. So here we go, Jurassic World. It'll be pretty fun. So if you guys build dioramas, Disney dioramas, I'd love to see your creations. This is my first one, and my daughter is going to love it. So take care.